Most people are not trapped by their circumstances. They are trapped by their mindset. You can be free, wealthy, impactful, and powerful, but not if you keep rehearsing the story of why life has been unfair to you. The chains are not on your hands, the chains are in your mind. And until you break free from the victim mindset, you will keep reliving the same struggles, even when opportunities are standing right in front of you. Freedom begins in the mind, not in external circumstances. You see, most people confuse external liberty with internal freedom. They believe that if they can just get out of debt, if they can just leave a toxic environment, if they can just change their job, or their relationship, or their living conditions, then and only then will they feel free. But the truth is, no amount of external change can create lasting freedom if the chains still remain in the mind. A person can live in a free nation and still walk around in slavery because they are bound by fear, by doubt, by excuses, and by a constant belief that life is happening to them instead of through them. On the other hand, there are people who may not have the best resources, who may have been through hardships, but because they trained their minds to see possibility, to embrace responsibility, and to choose faith over fear, they walk with a freedom that no external force can take away. Freedom is not a gift that others can give you. It is a choice that you give yourself when you decide to break free from the prison of small thinking. When you study the lives of the most resilient people in history, you will notice something remarkable. Their freedom did not come from perfect circumstances. It came from their perspective. Think about those who lived through oppression, poverty, or war, and yet still rose to greatness. Their environment tried to trap them, but their mind refused to be trapped. That is the essence of true freedom. Because if freedom were only external, then every wealthy person would be at peace, every educated person would be fulfilled, and every person living in comfort would be content. But that is not the reality we see around us. Some of the most miserable people are those who have everything externally, but nothing internally. They are living in mansions, but carrying a prison inside their heads. This reveals that freedom is not about the size of your house, the number in your bank account, or the position you hold. Freedom is about the condition of your inner world, the beliefs you carry, and the identity you choose to walk in daily. Freedom begins in the mind, because the mind is the control center of your life. Your body can be limited, your circumstances can be challenging, but if your mind refuses to bow, you will find a way forward. History proves it. The greatest leaders, innovators, and visionaries did not wait for everything around them to be perfect. They chose to walk in internal freedom first, and that freedom gave them the creativity, courage, and resilience to change the external world around them. And if they could do it, you can do it too. A victim mindset rehearses excuses. A victor mindset rehearses possibilities. The way you think, the way you speak to yourself, and the way you interpret your circumstances determine whether you are living as a victim or as a victor. The victim mindset thrives on rehearsing reasons why something cannot be done. It repeats the story of limitations, setbacks, and injustices. It says, "I would have succeeded if it weren't for this person, this situation, this obstacle." It builds a narrative that protects comfort but destroys progress. On the other hand, a victor mindset rehearses possibilities. It doesn't ignore challenges, but instead asks, what can I do with what I have? How can I rise from this? Where is the opportunity in this? The victor understands that circumstances are not final. They are simply raw material. The difference between excuses and possibilities is not in what happens to you, but in how you choose to interpret what happens to you. When you live rehearsing excuses, you lock yourself in a cycle of stagnation. Excuses become the justification for inactivity, and inactivity becomes the evidence for the excuse. A person says, "I can't start the business because I don't have capital," and because they never start, their lack of progress becomes more evidence for their excuse. They say, "I can't improve my life because of my past," and because they cling to that past, they sabotage their present. Excuses are self-fulfilling prophecies that feed the very bondage you claim to despise. The more you rehearse them, the more believable they sound, until you start treating them as truth. But victors rehearse possibilities until they become vision. They take the same situation and ask, if capital is missing, how can I be creative with what I already have? If my past was painful, how can I use it to fuel my present? If the door is closed, is there a window I can open? A victor rehearses these questions daily, and by doing so, they program their mind to see opportunities that victims remain blind to. Excuses focus on what's missing. Possibilities focus on what's available. Excuses highlight problems. Possibilities highlight potential. The victim mindset locks onto barriers and magnifies them, while the victor mindset looks at barriers and asks, how can this become a bridge? For example, two people may face the same setback, losing a job. The victim spends months complaining about how unfair it was, blaming their boss, the economy, or the system. They repeat this story so often that they never move forward. The victor, on the other hand, feels the pain but then rehearses possibilities. What skills do I have that can be monetized? How can I use this setback to redirect into something greater? Is this the chance I needed to start what I've been postponing? The situation is the same, but the outcome is drastically different because the rehearsed mindset was different. The danger of excuses is that they sound rational. Excuses rarely present themselves as lies. They present themselves as reasonable explanations. That is why so many people stay stuck, because their excuses make sense to them. They feel justified in their stagnation because they have rehearsed the story so many times that it feels like reality. But reality is not what happens to you. Reality is what you choose to believe about what happens to you. The victor does not deny facts, but refuses to bow to them. They acknowledge challenges, but look beyond them. They don't ask, why me? But what now? They don't say, I can't because, but I will if. This constant rehearsal of possibility shifts their energy, sharpens their creativity, and positions them for breakthroughs that others call impossible. A person rehearsing excuses lives in a prison with no bars, a prison they built themselves. Every time they tell the story of why they couldn't, why it was too hard, why someone else had it easier, they add another brick to the wall. Soon, they are trapped in a cell of their own words, but the person rehearsing possibilities builds a runway. Every thought, every affirmation, every creative question lays down another piece of track that launches them into new territory. Excuses trap you in circles. Possibilities propel you forward. This is why you must be careful what you rehearse in your mind every day. The rehearsal of excuses weakens your spirit. It makes you feel powerless, small, and dependent. Over time, you begin to believe that you are incapable of change. You surrender your authority to circumstances. The rehearsal of possibilities, however, strengthens you. It builds resilience, courage, and creativity. It reminds you that you are not at the mercy of life. You are the author of life. A victor understands that while they cannot control everything, they can always control their choices, and choices create change. The more they rehearse possibility, the more natural it becomes to act boldly, and bold action opens doors that the victim never even knew existed. Think about how children dream. They rehearse possibilities all the time. They believe they can be astronauts, inventors, leaders, explorers. Their minds are filled with imagination because they haven't yet been conditioned to rehearse excuses. But as people grow older, many trade imagination for limitation. They stop asking, what's possible? And start saying, here's why it can't happen. Yet the people who succeed, the ones who leave impact, are those who never stop rehearsing possibilities. They keep their imagination alive even in adversity. They refuse to accept that the end has been written until they pick up the pen themselves. A victim mindset rehearses excuses. A victor mindset rehearses possibilities because one is attached to the past and the other is attached to the future. The victim keeps replaying the movie of what went wrong. The victor keeps scripting the vision of what could go right. One is chained to history, the other is building destiny. And the deciding factor is not intelligence, money, or luck. It is simply what they choose to rehearse day after day until it becomes the song of their soul. You cannot heal by replaying your wounds. You heal by pursuing your potential. Every time you replay the story of what broke you, you reopen the same wound that is trying to close. You may think that by revisiting the pain, by repeating the story, you are somehow protecting yourself or processing it, but the truth is, you are prolonging your suffering. The more you rehearse the betrayal, the rejection, the loss, the injustice, the more you lock yourself into the identity of the wounded version of yourself. You begin to define yourself by what happened to you instead of what is possible for you. The wound may have been real, the hurt may have been deep, but replaying it over and over again turns pain into a prison. Healing cannot be found in repeating history. It is found in directing your energy toward destiny. You are not what happened to you. You are what you choose to build after it happened. Potential is the medicine that rewrites the narrative of your pain. When you shift your focus from what hurt you to what you can become, you start redirecting energy from despair into creation. You cannot change the past, but you can shape the future. And in the act of building, in the act of stretching toward your untapped capabilities, healing begins to take place. When you pour yourself into growth, you no longer have as much time or space to replay your wounds. The victim mindset wants you to camp in the valley of pain, but the victor mindset urges you to climb the mountain of possibility. That climb is not easy. It hurts. It demands strength you don't feel you have. But as you climb, you notice something powerful. The wound begins to lose its grip because your attention is no longer chained to it. Wounds replayed become identities. You hear people say things like, "I am the child of divorce. I am the product of abuse. I am the one who was abandoned." These may be facts about your past, but they are not identities for your future. Healing requires divorcing your identity from your injury. And the only way to do that is to step into the pursuit of potential. Potential says, yes, I was hurt, but I am also called to greatness. Potential says, yes, I was rejected, but I am still capable of creating a life of purpose. Potential says, yes, I have scars, but scars are proof that I survived, not evidence that I am still bleeding. The person who pursues potential turns scars into stories of victory. They transform pain into power. They shift from rehearsing wounds to rehearsing wins. The reason many people never heal is because they confuse attention with healing. They think that if they focus on their wounds long enough, the pain will eventually dissolve. But pain does not dissolve when it is replayed. It dissolves when it is repurposed. Pursuing potential gives purpose to your pain. It allows you to ask, how can I use what hurt me to help others? How can I transform what broke me into something that builds me? This is the alchemy of healing, taking the raw material of suffering and turning it into wisdom, strength, and contribution. Pursuing potential forces you to look forward, to think forward, and to live forward. You stop measuring yourself by the worst thing that happened to you and start measuring yourself by the best thing you are capable of becoming. Replaying wounds is like pouring water into a broken cup. It never fills, it never satisfies, it just keeps leaking. Pursuing potential is like pouring water into fertile soil. It produces growth, fruit, and multiplication. One depletes you, the other expands you. And here's the irony. The more you pursue your potential, the less power your wounds have over you. The memory may remain, but the sting is gone because you have risen higher than the pain. Pain loses authority when purpose takes over. The moment you start building, creating, striving, and stretching, you shift your mind from "I am broken" to "I am becoming." There are countless people who allowed their wounds to become the fuel for their potential. They refused to replay the story of being abandoned, overlooked, or mistreated, and instead wrote a new story of impact, abundance, and resilience. Every time they chose to pursue what they could become, healing rushed in to replace the space once occupied by bitterness. The truth is, bitterness grows in idle soil, but healing grows in moving soil. If you stay still, replaying your wounds, bitterness will root itself deeper. But when you move, when you pursue your potential, your movement uproots the bitterness and makes room for healing to flourish. Pursuing potential requires faith because you are reaching for something that you cannot yet fully see. But faith itself is part of the healing process. When you believe in the possibility of more, you weaken the grip of your past. When you act on that belief, you create evidence that the past cannot define you. Healing is not found in staying stuck with the story of what went wrong. It is found in creating the story of what can go right. Every step toward potential is a step away from pain's control. Every dream pursued is a wound repurposed. Every act of courage is another stitch that closes the cut. You cannot heal by replaying your wounds. You heal by pursuing your potential, because wounds belong to yesterday, but potential belongs to tomorrow. Wounds trap you in survival. Potential calls you into creation. Wounds keep you asking, why me? Potential pushes you to ask, what now? Wounds remind you of what you lost. Potential reveals to you what you still have left to give. And when you embrace potential, you discover that your capacity is far greater than your pain, and your destiny is far stronger than your history. Every excuse builds a prison. Every responsibility builds a future. Excuses may feel harmless in the moment. They seem like small shields that protect your pride, protect you from failure, protect you from having to admit where you fell short. But in reality, every excuse is a brick that you lay in the walls of your own prison. Every time you say, I couldn't because, or it wasn't my fault, or I'll start when, you add another layer of confinement around your potential. The tragic part is that most people spend years building this invisible prison and then wonder why they feel stuck, powerless, or trapped. They blame others. They blame circumstances. They blame timing. But what they fail to see is that the walls that restrict them were built with their own words and actions. Responsibility, however, is the opposite. Responsibility tears down walls and lays foundations. When you accept ownership of your life, your decisions, your actions, your outcomes, you stop building prisons and start building futures. Responsibility is not a burden. It is the blueprint of freedom. Excuses have a seductive quality because they temporarily relieve the discomfort of accountability. They let you sleep at night without confronting your failures. They make you feel safe because in the story of the excuse, you are not the problem, something else is. But that safety is an illusion. Excuses steal your power because they give all authority to external forces. If someone else is responsible for your failure, then someone else must also be responsible for your success. And when you give away that kind of authority, you chain yourself to the decisions, actions, and mercy of others. You are no longer the driver of your own life. You become a passenger, sitting in the back seat, watching opportunities pass by because you have surrendered control. That is why excuses build prisons. They strip you of your freedom by convincing you that you are powerless. Responsibility, on the other hand, may feel heavy at first, but it is the very weight that strengthens you. When you decide, if my life is going to change, it's on me, you pick up the keys to your own future. Responsibility forces you to confront your own habits, choices, and mindset. It doesn't let you hide behind the failures of others, the unfairness of life, or the challenges of circumstances. And while that may feel uncomfortable, it is also liberating because it places the power back in your hands. Responsibility says, if I built this reality with my past choices, then I can build a new reality with new choices. That awareness is the beginning of transformation. Responsibility is the hammer that breaks down the walls of excuses and the cement that builds a future of freedom. When you examine the difference between people who succeed and those who stay stuck, it almost always comes down to this principle. The ones who succeed take responsibility for their lives, even when it's not convenient, even when it doesn't feel fair, even when others are clearly to blame. They refuse to let external forces dictate their internal decisions. They understand that responsibility is not about taking the blame for everything, but about taking ownership of what you can control. And the truth is, you can always control your choices, your attitude, and your response. Excuses focus on what you cannot control, while responsibility focuses on what you can. That shift in focus is what separates progress from stagnation. Think about the word responsibility. At its root, it means the ability to respond. That means responsibility is not about punishment, it's about power. It is the ability to respond to any situation with creativity, strength, and decision. A person who takes responsibility refuses to remain helpless. They acknowledge reality, but then they choose how to act. A person who avoids responsibility becomes reactive, waiting for circumstances to change before they do anything. They become prisoners of waiting. The one who embraces responsibility becomes proactive, changing circumstances by first changing themselves. That is why responsibility builds a future, because it keeps you moving forward, even when life throws obstacles in your path. Excuses are addictive because they require nothing from you. They let you stay comfortable, even in your discomfort. They whisper, "It's not your fault, so you don't have to change." But that comfort turns into confinement. Every excuse you accept shrinks your vision. Every excuse you repeat lowers your standard. Every excuse you defend robs you of growth. Before long, you are not just making excuses, you are living them. You are dwelling in a prison where every brick was crafted by the phrase, "I can't." Responsibility demands more of you. It asks you to rise, to grow, to stretch. It is harder than excuses, but it is also far more rewarding, because responsibility may challenge you today, but it blesses you tomorrow. Every great achievement in history was built by people who embraced responsibility instead of excuses. Leaders, innovators, and visionaries had every reason to say, "I can't," and yet they chose to say, "I must." They could have blamed the lack of resources, the opposition, the unfair systems, or their circumstances, but instead they asked, "What can I do with what I have?" That question is the essence of responsibility, and the answer to that question is always the foundation of the future. Excuses close doors, but responsibility creates new ones. Excuses shrink your life, but responsibility expands it. Excuses waste your energy, but responsibility multiplies it. When you understand this principle deeply, you begin to monitor your own language. You catch yourself when you start to say, "I couldn't because," and you replace it with, "I didn't because I chose not to." That one shift changes everything, because now you see that the outcome was not outside your control, it was within your choice. And if it was within your choice, it can be changed by your choice. This mindset unlocks creativity, determination, and discipline. It keeps you from waiting on ideal conditions and pushes you to build with the materials you already have. Responsibility is not glamorous, but it is powerful. Excuses may feel good in the moment, but responsibility feels good for a lifetime. Every excuse builds a prison, every responsibility builds a future. One robs you of freedom, the other restores it. One keeps you chained to what was, the other propels you into what can be. One is rooted in fear, the other is rooted in courage. And the difference between living trapped and living free is not the circumstances around you, but the decisions within you. Victims replay pain. Victors repurpose pain. Pain is one of the most universal human experiences. Every person, no matter their background, their resources, or their position in life, has encountered it. The difference is not in whether pain shows up, but in how we choose to deal with it when it does. Victims make pain their identity. They carry it with them like a badge, replaying the memory of what hurt them over and over again until it becomes the dominant story of their life. Every conversation circles back to the wound. Every choice is filtered through the lens of what went wrong. They rehearse the betrayal, the rejection, the loss, or the failure so often that it becomes a permanent soundtrack in their minds. This replaying of pain does not make the hurt disappear. It amplifies it, it embeds it deeper, and it ensures that the pain has the power to dictate the future as much as it dictated the past. Victors, on the other hand, look at the very same pain and decide to turn it into raw material for progress. Instead of replaying the injury, they ask how it can be repurposed into wisdom, strength, resilience, or impact. When you replay pain, you stay stuck in the past. It's like watching the same tragic scene in a movie repeatedly, expecting the ending to change, but it never does. The brain and body relive the emotions of the wound every time the story is rehearsed. This keeps the wound fresh and raw, preventing healing. Victims unconsciously sabotage themselves because replaying pain feels like validation, but it is really self-imprisonment. They think they are holding on to the memory to prevent it from happening again, but in truth, they are guaranteeing that it continues to happen emotionally every single day. Victors refuse to give pain that kind of authority. They know the past cannot be undone, but it can be transformed. They take the same story of loss, betrayal, or failure and ask, how can I use this as fuel? How can I make this work for me instead of against me? How can this experience serve me or serve others? In asking those questions, they reframe pain as a teacher instead of a master. Repurposing pain does not mean denying it. It does not mean pretending it didn't hurt or minimizing what happened. It means refusing to let it define the rest of your life. A victor is willing to feel the pain, acknowledge it, and then transform it. For example, someone who was abandoned may take that pain and use it to become the most present parent they can be. Someone who was rejected may use that pain to fuel their determination to succeed. Someone who failed publicly may take that pain and use it to teach others how to rise after failure. Repurposed pain becomes purpose. It stops being a wound and starts being a weapon. It shifts from being the reason you stay small to being the reason you grow bigger. The truth is, pain will either paralyze you or propel you. The difference lies in perspective. When you replay pain, you paralyze yourself because you are choosing to live in a past moment that cannot be changed. When you repurpose pain, you propel yourself because you are using that same energy to create something new. Think of it like fire. Fire can burn down a house if it is uncontrolled, but the same fire can cook food, heat a home, or forge steel when it is harnessed. Pain is fire. Victims let it burn them down. Victors use it to forge strength. One of the reasons victims replay pain is because it gives them a sense of identity. They can say, "This happened to me, and that is who I am." It becomes a script that explains their present reality, but the cost is too high because that identity chains them to the very thing they claim to want freedom from. Victors, however, do not settle for that script. They take the pen back and write a new one. They do not deny what happened, but they refuse to let it be the final chapter. They turn the wound into wisdom and the scar into a story that inspires others. Their identity shifts from the one who was hurt to the one who overcame. Another key difference is how energy is used. Replaying pain drains energy because the focus is on reliving something that cannot be changed. Repurposing pain releases energy because the focus is on creating something that can still be shaped. A person who keeps replaying the story of betrayal will stay bitter and exhausted. But a person who uses that same story to learn discernment, build stronger relationships, or help others avoid similar hurt will feel energized, even empowered. Pain becomes a source of fuel when it is repurposed, but it remains a source of fatigue when it is replayed. The victim mindset is the greatest thief of freedom because it convinces you that your circumstances determine your destiny. It whispers that until people change, until the system changes, until luck shows up, you cannot move forward. But here's the reality. No system, no person, no circumstance can hold down a free mind. When you decide that your mind is not for sale, that your destiny is not negotiable, that your calling is not subject to the opinions of others, you become unstoppable. You may encounter obstacles, you may face opposition, but those become stepping stones instead of stumbling blocks, because your mind is free enough to turn resistance into resilience. The battle is never outside first. It is always inside. Once you win the battle in the mind, the external battles begin to shrink in size. This is why responsibility is the key to freedom. People who are trapped in bondage blame, complain, and wait. They wait for someone else to fix their lives. They wait for conditions to become favorable. They wait for permission. But waiting is just another form of slavery. The free mind does not wait. It creates. It does not complain. It builds. It does not blame. It takes ownership. Responsibility is the act of reclaiming authority over your own life. It is saying, no matter what happened yesterday, I choose what I will do today. That decision unlocks freedom because it removes the shackles of dependency on others. As long as you blame others for where you are, you remain chained to their actions. But the moment you own your choices, you break the link and step into liberation. The shift from bondage to freedom is not instant, but it is intentional. It begins with changing the language you speak to yourself. Instead of saying, I can't because of my past, the free mind says, I can because I choose. Instead of saying, I'll never because I lack, the free mind says, I will because I create. Words shape thoughts, and thoughts shape reality. When you change your words, you rewire your thinking. When you rewire your thinking, you change your patterns. When you change your patterns, you change your life. The mind is the factory of freedom, and what you manufacture in it becomes the material of your future. Many people are held captive not by physical chains, but by invisible ones: fear, doubt, and insecurity. Fear tells them not to try. Doubt convinces them they are not enough. Insecurity makes them measure themselves by other people's standards. These chains are far more dangerous than any external barrier, because they prevent a person from even attempting to walk out of bondage. A locked door cannot stop a person who has the key, but if that same person believes the door is locked when it is actually open, they will never step through. That is exactly how mental chains work. They keep you stuck in places you are already free to leave. But the moment you awaken to the truth that freedom is a decision, not a condition, you stop waiting for doors to open and start walking through them with authority. It's important to realize that the mind can either be your warden or your liberator. It can build walls that keep you stuck, or it can build wings that help you fly. The difference lies in what you feed it. A mind fed on negativity, excuses, and self-pity will imprison you. A mind fed on gratitude, vision, and responsibility will set you free. This is why you cannot afford to be careless with your thoughts. Every thought is either building your chains or building your wings. The discipline of freedom is learning to master your thoughts so they serve your purpose instead of sabotaging it. History is full of examples of people who faced unimaginable pain and chose to repurpose it rather than replay it. They took tragedies and turned them into testimonies. They took rejection and turned it into resilience. They took loss and turned it into leadership. That is why they are remembered, not because they were spared from pain, but because they refused to waste it. Pain in the hands of a victim is destructive. Pain in the hands of a victor is transformative. It builds character, it deepens compassion, and it sharpens vision. Victims replay pain. Victors repurpose pain. The difference is subtle, but life-changing. It is not about what happened to you. It is about what you decide to do with what happened. Replaying keeps you stuck in the same loop, powerless and defined by yesterday. Repurposing breaks the loop and builds a new future where the very thing that tried to destroy you becomes the reason you rise. Pain is inevitable, but whether it becomes your prison or your platform is entirely up to you. Freedom requires rejecting blame and embracing ownership. Blame is one of the most deceptive traps in life because it disguises itself as justice. When things go wrong, when you face setbacks, when you feel disappointed, blame feels like a natural response. It gives you someone or something outside yourself to point to and say, this is why my life is not where it should be. It feels like relief, because if someone else is responsible, then you are off the hook. But what feels like relief in the short term becomes bondage in the long term. Every time you blame others, you hand over your power. You declare with your own words that your destiny is in the hands of someone else. You put the keys of your life in the pocket of another person, another system, or another circumstance. That is not freedom. That is captivity dressed up as justification. When you choose ownership instead of blame, everything shifts. Ownership means saying, I may not control everything that happens to me, but I will always control how I respond. Ownership acknowledges that life is not always fair. People will not always treat you right. Circumstances will not always be favorable, but none of that decides who you become. Ownership says, I take responsibility for my choices, my actions, and my outcomes. That does not mean excusing the wrong others have done, but it does mean refusing to let their wrongness determine your future. Blame ties you to the past. Ownership ties you to possibility. Blame keeps you stuck in what already happened. Ownership pulls you forward into what you can still create. The psychology of blame is dangerous because it creates a false sense of power while stripping away real power. When you blame, you feel momentary relief. Your ego feels protected, your pride feels safe, and you avoid the sting of admitting your role. But underneath, you reinforce helplessness. You are saying, I cannot move forward until they change, until life changes, until circumstances change. That mindset keeps you locked in waiting mode. Ownership may sting at first, because it forces you to face the truth, that your life is in many ways a reflection of your decisions. But the sting of ownership quickly transforms into strength, because it reveals that if you created this reality with past choices, you can also create a new one with new choices. Ownership is empowering because it puts the steering wheel of life back in your hands. Freedom and blame cannot coexist. As long as you blame, you remain a prisoner to whatever you are pointing at. If you blame your parents, you are chained to their mistakes. If you blame the economy, you are chained to its fluctuations. If you blame your boss, your past, your circumstances, or even your pain, you are declaring that those things have more authority over your life than you do. Freedom requires a bold rejection of blame. It requires you to say, no matter what happened, no matter who failed me, no matter how unfair it was, I will not live my life with my power in someone else's hands. That rejection of blame is not easy, but it is the doorway to liberation. Embracing ownership is not about guilt, it is about growth. People often resist ownership because they equate it with shame. They think, if I take ownership, that means I'm admitting I'm the problem. But ownership is not about self-condemnation. It is about self-empowerment. It is not about saying you are the problem, but about declaring that you are the solution. Blame makes you focus on the things you cannot control. Ownership forces you to focus on the things you can. And when you focus on what you can control, your attitude, your actions, your decisions, you begin to change the trajectory of your life. Think of blame like an anchor. Every time you cast blame, you drop that anchor deeper into the ground of your past. You may try to move, you may even row harder, but you will not go far because the anchor keeps you tied. Ownership is cutting the rope to that anchor. It does not erase what happened in the past, but it frees you to move forward without being bound to it. Many people spend years wondering why they cannot progress, not realizing they are dragging around a heavy anchor of blame. They want freedom, but they are still pointing fingers. The moment they embrace ownership, they cut the rope, and suddenly the ship of their life can move again. Victims live in blame, but victors live in ownership. The victim mindset looks for someone to fault, someone to accuse, someone to hold accountable for where they are. The victor mindset looks inward and says, what can I do to move forward? This is why victors rise out of the same circumstances that victims stay stuck in. Two people can go through the same struggle, poverty, rejection, loss, and one stays bitter while the other becomes better. The difference is not in what they experienced, but in whether they chose blame or ownership. Ownership builds strength because it forces you to grow. It teaches you resilience, responsibility, and resourcefulness. When you own your outcomes, you begin to see yourself as a creator, not just a consumer of life. You stop saying, I can't because of them, and you start saying, I will because of me. That shift changes everything. Ownership empowers you to learn from failure instead of being defined by it. Ownership pushes you to rise from mistakes instead of hiding behind them. Ownership turns life into a classroom, while blame turns it into a courtroom. In the courtroom of blame, you are always defending yourself, pointing fingers, and arguing. In the classroom of ownership, you are always learning, growing, and building. Freedom requires rejecting blame and embracing ownership, because freedom is about power. Power to decide, power to act, power to create. Blame strips you of power and convinces you that someone else holds the key. Ownership hands the key back to you and says, "Here, build, grow, change, and create." The moment you reject blame, you stop waiting for others to set you free. The moment you embrace ownership, you realize you had the key all along. True transformation happens when you stop waiting for rescue and step into becoming your own solution. Most people spend their lives in waiting mode. They are waiting for someone to see their potential, waiting for a door to open, waiting for circumstances to change, waiting for a mentor, a leader, or an opportunity to show up and save them. Waiting feels easier because it allows you to postpone responsibility. If you are waiting for rescue, you do not have to act today, you do not have to risk failure, and you do not have to confront the parts of yourself that need to grow. But the tragedy of waiting is that it keeps you stuck in the same place, convinced that your breakthrough is in someone else's hands. You are essentially handing over the pen of your life story and saying, "I will only move forward when another person writes the next chapter for me." That is not transformation. That is stagnation disguised as patience. Real transformation begins the moment you decide that no one is coming to save you, and that is okay because you are capable of becoming your own solution. It is not about rejecting help, guidance, or opportunities when they come, but about refusing to make your progress dependent on them. When you step into the role of your own rescuer, you stop asking, "When will someone else open the door for me?" and start asking, "How can I build a door myself?" You stop hoping for someone else to hand you permission and begin giving yourself permission to act, to build, to create, and to pursue. Transformation is not in waiting. It is in doing. It is in moving forward with what you have, even when what you have does not seem like enough. Waiting for rescue weakens you because it conditions you to depend on external forces for internal progress. Every time you delay action, telling yourself that one day the right person, the right opportunity, or the right timing will arrive, you strengthen the belief that your life is outside your control. Over time, that belief becomes a prison. You feel powerless, not because you lack ability, but because you have handed over your power. Stepping into becoming your own solution, however, strengthens you. It requires courage, initiative, and persistence. It forces you to confront the uncomfortable truth that if your life is going to change, it is up to you. And in that confrontation, you discover a power you did not know you had. You realize that you are not as weak, not as limited, and not as helpless as you once believed. Many people fail to transform because they are waiting for conditions to be perfect. They say, "I'll start when I have more money," or "I'll step out when I have more support," or "I'll pursue it when the timing is right." But conditions are rarely perfect, and waiting for perfect conditions is just another way of postponing progress. Transformation requires you to move in imperfect conditions, to act with limited resources, and to believe in possibilities that are not yet visible. Becoming your own solution means refusing to let what you lack keep you from using what you have. It means leveraging every bit of strength, knowledge, skill, and opportunity available to you instead of sitting idle and wishing for more. The truth is, rescue is not coming, and that is good news. Because if you are waiting for someone else to rescue you, you are also giving them the power to control your destiny. If they can save you, they can also ignore you. If they can lift you, they can also let you fall. But when you decide to be your own solution, you reclaim that power. You no longer live at the mercy of others. You stop living as a beggar of opportunity and start living as a creator of opportunity. You realize that freedom, success, and impact are not given. They are built, and you are the builder. Stepping into becoming your own solution is not about isolation. It is about empowerment. It does not mean you refuse support, but it means that support becomes a supplement, not the foundation. If someone helps you, it accelerates your journey. If no one helps you, you are still moving forward because your progress is not dependent on them. This mindset is what separates those who transform their lives from those who remain stuck. Victims wait for rescue. Victors rise and build. Victims say, "I can't move until someone else acts." Victors say, "I will move, and others will join me when they see me moving." When you become your own solution, your pain becomes your teacher, your setbacks become your motivation, and your failures become your fuel. You stop waiting for someone to erase your struggle and instead use your struggle to sharpen your strength. You begin to see that every challenge was not meant to stop you, but to shape you into someone who no longer needs to wait for rescue. Transformation happens not when life gets easier, but when you get stronger. And you get stronger every time you decide, "I will not wait for rescue. I will act now. I will take ownership. I will build forward." True transformation happens when you stop waiting for rescue and step into becoming your own solution, because in that moment you reclaim your authority. You recognize that while others may inspire you, encourage you, or support you, they cannot live your life for you. You stop outsourcing responsibility for your happiness, your success, and your freedom, and you step fully into the truth that the answers you seek are already within you. The future is not waiting for someone else to deliver it into your hands. The future is waiting for you to claim it with your own.